Hello, today is February the 7th, Friday, 2020. Guten Tag und Grüß Gott. This is Newswit. So here I am, once again, in front of the camera, thinking about how I'm going to get through my subjects that I have slated for today. But it shouldn't be too difficult because today, according to my historical calendar, is actually a very auspicious day. In 1964, on this day, the Beatles arrived in New York. Now, it could be that that people watching this video at whenever time in the future, or maybe in the next day, may not even know who the Beatles are, but anybody connected with music and loves music, they do understand Paul McCartney and Wings. They do understand the Beatles, and they also know what a phenomenon they must have been at the time. But from time to time, you hear young people talk, and a friend of mine heard that to be said, that one young fellow to another one in a record store back then, that was probably a decade or more ago, said, Paul McCartney, before he was with Wings, was with a group called the Beatles. Yeah. Well, the Beatles were huge. Of course, I do remember the Beatles. It was an amazing phenomenon. They even before they came to the United States, and then on this day, this February 7th, 1964, they appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show, and they played their iconic song and sang their iconic song, "I Want to Hold Your Hand." And I've observed women, preteens, and teenagers hearing this song put them in some sort of a trance and transported them into something to where they started to scream, especially the little ones, and scream with some sort of an ecstatic experience of the Beatles. So the Beatles were clearly a phenomenon, and I'm trying to be sure that I stated properly, but I don't know whether you can overstate it, that they were the huge influence on the music business. Probably even today, people are listening that want to further their career and so forth. But at the time, in 1963 and 64, they were huge. There was, they were a phenomenon. They emerged from Britain, from a group called the Quarrymen, which had before they had Ringo in the group, there was another drummer there, and evidently he was called the fifth Beatle and so on. And he was kind of bitter because he was kicked out, and these guys then became just super famous. In fact, one of them, I can't remember which one, but remarked, "We are more famous than Jesus Christ." And in terms of what the rest of the world knew, it could have been a factual statement, although he kind of got criticized for comparing himself to Jesus Christ, and that was bad news. Anyway, so that was the historical portion of what I'm about to say now, or what I'm saying now. I don't know. Somehow I don't have my right gait for this particular segment, but maybe it's because I need a lot more practice. But anyway, far more significant of these times is the fact that Donald Trump, the president, was impeached, and subsequently, a couple of days ago, on Wednesday, was acquitted by the Senate during the trial of the Senate. In other words, it has to go from Congress to be impeached, and they lay out the articles of impeachment, and then the trial happens in the Senate, and it was a little bit of a foregone conclusion that he would be acquitted, because while there's a majority of Democrats in Congress that were in lockstep, well, actually not. There were some Democrats that crossed over and voted with the Republicans against impeachment. But in any case, they still had a majority, and that allowed them to take the articles of impeachment to the Senate, and then the Senate, of course, had several days, actually a couple of weeks or so. I think a little bit more than a couple of weeks. They had heard arguments, and Chief Justice Roberts presided, and they heard arguments from both sides why the president should be removed from office, for high crimes and misdemeanors, and then arguments of why whatever he did not rise to the level of necessary impeachment. And so the majority of the Senate, which were all the Republicans who have the majority in the Senate, agreed to acquit President Trump. And so Wall Street Journal of Wednesday shows Trump acquitted. There he is, acquitted. And of course the Democrats were apoplectic over this. And the next day, which was yesterday, Trump celebrated in the White House, and the Democrats are really pissed off because Trump didn't apologize like Clinton apologized when he was impeached and subsequently acquitted for lying to Congress, and of course, that salacious story of sex in the Oval Office and Monica Lewinsky and so on. I don't have to go through that again. But anyway, so Trump is not an apologetic sort, so he will is celebrating the fact that total acquittal is one of his finest moments, or the best words he's ever heard. And it's kind of gloating over all that. But that the nation had to go through this BS of impeachment and acquittal, subsequent acquittal, which was, it was almost a foregone conclusion, So the Democrats, I'm not sure how this is going to play when it comes to election time this November, but my guess is that the Democrats are probably going to be hurting over this unless they can pull some sort of a rabbit out of their hat. But anyway, so that was basically the politics. Well, one more thing on the politics. So on the same day that Trump was in trial in the Senate, he gave the State of the Union address, and I didn't mention impeachment or anything like this. But anyway, if I'm not mistaken, the Senate had already voted, so he knew he was clear, and that really didn't seem to worry him. But Nancy, all the Democrats, whenever Trump spoke and the Republicans rose in applause, all the Democrats sat there stone-faced, And of course, the Speaker of the House, which is Nancy Pelosi, she sat behind him, and you could just see her mugging and all that. But ultimately, she took a step that was kind of criticized throughout the news cycle in the next few days, and that is she tore up the copy of the speech that Trump handed her before he spoke. And she just ceremoniously tore that speech in half, section by section, a couple of pages at a time, and it was kind of a sign of disrespect for the office, and of course, a sign of her hatred for Trump and the fact that he wasn't removed from office as she had hoped. Now, if he would have been removed from office, that I don't think that was a big deal to the Democrats, because so who's taken his place? It would be Mike Pence, the vice president, who's also a Republican. But the bigger damage, and what they were really hoping for, is that he would not be on the election ballot in 2020, and so they would no longer have to deal with Trump, and Republicans would have to come up with a new face, and Mike Pence may have not been the right face, and it kind of gave Democrats, from today's perspective, it would have given them an advantage in the November elections. Anyway, so the news cycle, of course, is still dominated by the Wuhan flu, and people are now calling it the Wu flu. And there's some over 25,000 cases in China, and worldwide, I think. But in China, there are nearly 600 dead already. And so now this particular bug, the coronavirus, has taken on a far more vicious and aggressive role than what SARS had done in the past. So while there are only around 12 cases or so in the U.S., and I think there was one death of a very young child so far, so we haven't really experienced this, but we also don't know what the economic impact of all this is, because China is kind of on lockdown right now. Certainly the Wuhan city, there are now reports of when people go outside without a mask on, drones come and find them and chase them back into the house. And today we found out that the doctor, I think it was yesterday actually, we found out that the doctor that first sounded the alarm bell on the coronavirus had the virus and died. Now, of course, the Chinese are saying from the virus, or they're just saying that he died, But the word on the internet is that when he was punished, evidently he was severely tortured, and it's thought that the fact that he blew the whistle on that virus actually kind of caused his death by Chinese government, I suppose. But those are only rumors, so we really don't know what he died from. But we knew that he was in jeopardy, and he was already punished by the Chinese government for coming out with this story of the coronavirus. And somehow they didn't like the way he sounded the alarm bell on that. Anyway, so this is where we are right now. Of course, here in America, we're also kind of worried about the Wuhan flu and how this is going to affect our imports from China, and because there's so much of it, it's made in China. And of course, so far as we know, the virus can only be transmitted from person to person, and for a short time through contact on doorknobs and things like this. So maybe the container ships and so forth are okay to arrive here. They're just going to have to work that out, and I'm not sure how that'll play out. And we'll talk about it again in the future. So that's really the big story right now. As a matter of fact, this morning we found out that China has lifted 50% of the tariffs that they have on their imports from America. So they must be thinking that they really do want to have soybeans and some of the things that they like to buy from here, maybe wood. I'm not sure what all they import, and that could also be cars and stuff. But the entire country, the billion people or so in China, are really pretty much on lockdown, and our government is still trying to get American citizens out of China, and of course they're being shuffled to military bases under quarantine and checked and so forth. And they're not going to be released, until the incubation period, which is like a couple of weeks or so for the virus. And if then they are clear and the virus hasn't reared its ugly head, then I guess they can go into the general population. But I really hope that they don't just let the virus escape. But Europe has got a hell of a problem with it right now, because some woman from China came in contact with a lot of people in Germany, and so now they're trying to find out, who they need to quarantine and who they need to find to kind of contain the spread of this guy. And that seems to be a really bad bug, because even worse than SARS, and we thought that SARS was really a terrible thing. So will these epidemics and pandemics happen in the future? Of course. These viruses are really resilient. They also know how to morph into new forms and avoid any kind of drugs and attacks on their very being. So they're really a fascinating entity, and it's been around for from the very beginning of life on Earth. I'm not saying the coronavirus has, but some single cell organism has, so about 2 billion years ago or more, maybe 3 billion years ago, from which everything came that we have here right now. Unless we find out that there was such a thing as panspermia and life originated elsewhere and came to the Earth. And of course, our religious teachings are teaching us something different, so we don't really know that much about it. In any case, I think that we just have to kind of wait and see how this plays out. So now, I bid you farewell. Auf Wiedersehen.